I'm taking a little bit of time off the floor and out of session. I know that there's minor discussions going on about the budget right now. So we'll
why
turn
I'm
it
sitting between them.
over to you and make and make sure that you get all of your questions answered. This evening for dinner, we will welcome back to the fold Senator Kurt Bramble and the NCSL Vice President, President-elect. He decided to, after flying in on the airplane with me last night, he decided he needed to go to the hospital to get a kidney stone taken care of. So he's now feeling like he's among the living. That's a half a day, so he should be joining us this evening. But anyway, we'll turn it over to the panel, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, and of course, welcome to North Carolina. We've been going through something that would, kidney stones would actually probably feel better. You're looking at three of the conferees on the budget, so and Senator Heiss and I live together here in Raleigh, so we do at least speak, at night and say, well, good night, and followed by an expletive. Nah, kidding. It's we actually have a nice bipartisan agreement. We're all Republicans, but we get along very well in our IT oversight and with our IT committees. Senator Brock and I go way back. He was at my wedding, so at least we have enough dirt on each other that nobody gets out of hand. We just challenge the other one. So, and then of course we've welcomed our new State Chief Information Officer, Chris Estes. Has been a welcome addition. Has fit right in with what we're hoping to accomplish with IT and state government. As you know, not an easy topic. Government doesn't move fast. It moves even slower when we talk about IT. And some of the things that we've had to face in North Carolina. And through nobody's fault, like I said, it's one of those things where, as you can tell, we're some of the younger folks at the legislature, you can imagine. Probably the same at yours. Not always an easy sell. When I make speeches about IT and the IT budget on the floor, they usually last less than a minute. At that point in time, people's eyes are glazed over and they just press the yes button just because they don't even want to talk about it anymore. But amazing power. We are building a Death Star. So if any of you are Star Wars fans, please don't share that with some of our other colleagues. But they voted for it. Just remember that. Which in my mind means that they've endorsed it wholeheartedly. Yeah. And part of the Death Star program is our GDAC program. And we do have a good time. So if we get too off topic, somebody out there will throw a spitball at us and get us back on topic. But with GDAC, it's been really a phenomenal thing that we're doing in state government and really transforming what we do. And I'm going to turn it over to my senators. Probably Senator Heiss. I think Senator Heiss, I don't know if you gave birth to it, but he took it out of the nest and started at least feeding it. And would you want to add how we got started?
Well, I will. Thank you all again. Welcome to North Carolina. Make sure I say that as frequently as I can. Come back, spend all you'd like here. And, helps our budget process. It was coming through. We actually started, I only was elected to the legislature in 2010. The process really began a little bit before that, or at least the inspiration for it, by a very tragic event. We had a student at the University of North Carolina here, her name was Eve Carson, who was murdered by two individuals. As it turns out, those two individuals had been in the magistrate's office very close to the time of the murder, and no one knew that they had outstanding warrants. That they could have been taken in at that point, hadn't violated their probation, could have been taken in at that point. We could have avoided that issue. And what SAS here was instrumental in coming up and developing kind of the first program for we call CJ Leads. Still exists in the state of North Carolina, but it actually brought all the criminal justice databases together. And if you want to hear a success story in North Carolina, ride around with a state trooper, and they'll talk about CJ Leads. Now, every computer they open in their car has access to all the information they use from DMV, from records, from warrants. They've got all that as soon as they run your tag. As soon as they see your tag, all that information is immediately pulled up. And the times that they've talked to them when they're out, the times they've gone up to a vehicle and known so much about that individual before they know what they're approaching. and the stories they have out there of what that's saved them has been incredible. But looking at that program and having some background in data as I do, and I used to work for the U.S. Census Bureau and as a statistician there and trying to pull these together, when you look at how much was possible in the small scale of just criminal justice, maybe being the data geek I am, I get really excited when we start talking about what's possible in the large scale. Now, we have not done IT well up to this point in the state of North Carolina. Matter of fact, I'm still doing a budget in HHS, and I have no enrollment data, and I can't tell you what claims have been spent in the last year, yet I'm having to forecast a budget off of that. That's coming out.
We call it pixie dust and unicorns.
That's coming in. So, but to begin
That's
to look
calcification.
at those type of things and put them together and just that concept of what is possible. And some of the first projects we've picked out, we had a huge problem with unemployment in the state of North Carolina, particularly on the unemployment insurance side. But there is nothing in the Employment Security Commission that would talk to the Department of Labor or talk to the tax office. So someone could never have filed a business with the Secretary of State, yet be paying unemployment insurance and having claims, and we couldn't even look between all those data to make sure they were correct. We'd run up, most states had a deficit, but we'd run up almost $3 billion in debt in unemployment insurance. Since GDAC's been on the gas, and we made some changes to the unemployment and other, that's now under $1 billion in the state in about 16 months. It's the type of turnaround that was possible. It took some changes to unemployment and others as well, but now we actually know what we should change and kind of making those decisions. We also asked people we had to change the name. The first one I came up with was GBIC, the Government Business Intelligence Competency Center. And that just led to too many jokes. So we finally came up with something shorter and GDAC that actually worked out for the state. We also had to decide where this was going to be. And quite frankly, we began the creation of this with a conversation about who could we trust and who could we work with more than where it originally fit. And quite frankly, it wasn't until we got a CIO that we actually could trust and we thought knew how to turn a PC on that we decided to make that shift and move it across to the CIO's office. So I guess
Still
that's
looking
my
for the
opening.
on switch.
But at some point, we are certain that Chris will find that on switch. Yeah, and then it's part of the challenges too that, and Senator Brock has been in the legislature longer than Senator Heiss or I, 12 years now. So he's kind of seen it come and go as, again, no one person's fault, but it's just something that was always an afterthought. DOT, they want to build roads, right? HHS, we assume they want to help people with health problems and mental issue problems and everything else. So again, committee members would come in with their levels of expertise. IT touches everything we do in state government, as you know, and it's only going to become more in the state of North Carolina and your state too. But Senator, if you would tell us a little bit more about a little more of the history of just even IT in North Carolina, coming in as the young geek into the Senate. I think he dropped the median age about 20 years when you came in, right?
Probably a little bit more than 20 years. I was elected in 02. Came in, first thing when I talked to staff, hey, I want to sync my contacts with our system. I have a PDA. We can't do it. I said, well, guys, follow all the security protocols. Don't worry about it. No, you have the fastest computer in the state right now in the General Assembly. So it was really difficult, especially on the Senate side, where actually our computers were outlawed. Now, you think about whatever the term was they used. Amy, you were a part of it back there. Y'all had them, but we didn't have them in the minority. I don't know. Anyway, but getting back to the point is that in the whole budget process and everything else, we're talking about the level of expertise of the legislators. And it just wasn't part of the normal conversation, especially in budget. It was always almost an afterthought each and every time. And we've had some high-profile problems. I think every state's had some high-profile IT issue, but it happened year after year after year, and nobody was at fault, and everybody was at fault. Then coming up, and Ralph was right when we had the Eve Carson murder here in Chapel Hill. Also, we had Sean Bryson, who was a highway patrolman up in western North Carolina, whose child was born, I believe, just days after he was killed up there. Family friend. But anyway, those issues really hit the entire legislature. It was on the media. They said, do something. And here was the problem that we had in state government. We had agencies that were dragging their feet. We had people that did not want to play, did not want to work with us. Also, do we have someone that was competent in the agency to pull it together? And I'll say this, that if any awards or honors go to anyone, it's Dr. Goodnight at SAS. It was Dr. Goodnight that basically, kind of like LBJ used to grab people by the lapels and say, come, let us reason together. He's a tall guy. Everybody's tall to me. But anyway, you know, with his focus on this issue, and it really brought everybody together that, you know, forget about the silos, forget about who's in whose sandbox. We're going to fix this. And the reason why we're so proud of CJ Leeds was that it was through SAS, Dr. Goodnight, who really pushed this forward, and how it really was a wake-up call to so many people that we need to do this more and more. And it's interesting when we did have a switch in leadership, that working as a chairman, I think I've been a chair about 4 different appropriations committees now, of talking to the different agencies of what you can do. And they're like, oh, you know, we don't want to share with revenue or DMV or anything else. All right, what if we use this data? Hey, that'll be great. You know, that will help us so much. Well, that's what we're trying to do. And I think, you know, as you know, people have changed and times have changed. But in North Carolina, it was almost on a weekly basis. We had a failed IT project, or where something has failed with the state has just constantly hammered us day in and day out. And it's, well, that's right, it's not our fault, it's the media's fault. But no, those are issues we've had to get to. And we looked at, you know, what were the root causes of the problem? Where in the decision-making process, where was error made? And I'll say this, it's wonderful having world-class companies like SAS here in the Research Triangle Park. It's wonderful. The bad thing about it, they take some of our best talent away. And it's really tough. It's a very competitive market to get competent IT people. And that hurts sometimes when we're working some of our day-to-day operations in state government. It's tough to dangle out our great pension plan we have for the state government. When you're looking at, y'all have daycare, dry cleaning. I mean.
After y'all speak, we were going to show them any of those things.
Yeah, don't kill them, man. I mean, Jason and Ralph offered to give massages, but
Usually after 9 o'clock, though.
yeah, just the hairy arms just kind of set people off. But anyway, but you know, that being said, it's really tough for us to take a look at it. But how do we make those decisions, and how do we build a new government and look at our past successes that we have, which is CJ Leeds, and how do we implement that? And plus, in a state as diverse as North Carolina. I chair Ag and Environment, and when I'm talking to a farmer in eastern North Carolina, we're talking about 10,000, 15,000 acres to maybe a 3-acre farm in Ralph's neck of the woods, which are in the Appalachian Mountains, high in the Appalachian Mountains. So you look at it as a state as diverse, and how do we have an IT system that is centrally based here in North Carolina? It's the way our system of government is set up. We're a very strong central-based government that will work up in Mitchell County, up in the highest point on the East Coast, to something out at Cape Hatteras or Buxton on the Outer Banks. And that's been a real problem with us, to have the infrastructure and also to make sure we have the quality personnel in our state government to actually run those systems. So we've got a mountain in front of us as far as overcoming that. But you know, a great thing for us is leaning on the expertise of the companies like SAS here in the RTP to really push the ball forward.
That's right. And we've got a lot of homegrown talent. Dr. Goodnight was at NC State, and so we're churning out just in this area through the 3 major universities, talent that quickly wants to come to SAS and some of the other tech companies that are right here and where you're at. And so that's been a nice way for us to funnel that talent, and in some cases, or many cases, outsource to a company that's already here in our backyard. So that's been helpful. And we do have mountains in front of us. Fortunately for us, Senator Heiss is a mountain man. One leg is longer than the other because of the way they have to stand on the mountain when he's doing that farming. But nevertheless, we are conquering a lot of these challenges, and that's been the exciting thing. And so we're in the middle of budget negotiations. The one thing that has pretty much already been decided, while the rest of our colleagues are out there, hand-to-hand combat and taking knives, daggers, and whatever else they might bring into the legislature with each other, is that we pretty much negotiated the IT stuff before I ever got to the table. We're in agreement. It's something that we're all very much in agreement with, again, working with our CIO, but also when you look at what we're expanding in both the in the agreement is that GDAC and CJ leads. And the reason we're able to do that and take that back to our colleagues is because they know it works. And they're excited about now, as they've started to come to understand what this really does entail across the multiple agencies, just what an investment that is, because we're getting a lot of payback very quickly on that. Senator Heiss alluded to some of the fraud that we've identified. When you can drop that from a $2.5 billion deficit to $1 billion deficit in what was it, 18 months' time, that's pretty huge. As you look at your budgets, you know what that could mean to you. And like I said, adding to the component now that we've got a CIO, Chris Estes comes from Booz Allen, comes from the private sector. He's been great to work with. He came in back in January 2013. Had you been to Raleigh before? Maybe once or twice and seen the museums? Yeah. But just for him to adapt to the culture, which is government, and to learn kind of who the players are and what all that means, and giving him about 6 months just to find his desk and figure out the legislature. And when he does that, we'll promote him. But maybe he could run for governor. But nevertheless, he's here, and so he's had to experience these multiple projects that have also been problems. But then look at some of the things that are working. And so, Chris, I'll turn it over to you to let you kind of explain where, as you came in, airdropped in, to see what these yo-hos, and me included, were doing. As we were moving forward, we found a partner, and let you talk a little bit about that experience.
Sure. So for me, coming new to state government, the first priority is I have a governor that understands IT and wants to move IT from the back office to the boardroom, right? He understands that to accomplish his vision and his mission for the state, we need to reduce the cost of our operations, and we can do that more effectively through IT. So IT is not a cost center, it's a business enabler. So I sit at the cabinet meetings with the governor every week, so that's helped break down the silos that these members have seen over the last several years. The second piece, I hope that you kind of see it here today, is the support of the General Assembly, right? So my predecessors, maybe not so successfully, have not been able to have the relationship that I've been able to establish with these folks. And so I think your CIO has to have a good relationship with the members, because ultimately you're the board, right? If I were a private company executive, you would be the board of directors. And the governor is kind of, I think of him as the president or CEO of the company, right? So my job is to keep the board happy and also the president happy. So I spend a lot of time with the members, making sure they understand what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish. So I would encourage you, if your CIOs, to spend some time with them if you're involved in IT, because it takes all those branches of government to kind of agree on a common vision and move forward together. That's that leadership that it takes to be successful. The other piece that then comes to the company and the leadership, we're fortunate to have SAS headquarters in North Carolina. So that's very helpful for us, as Dr. Goodnight can put his name and his resources behind helping the state solve a very complex problem. For the state, we don't always have the luxury of paying, and probably like many of the other states, we don't pay as well as the private sector. So we have to consume those services from private sector companies. And fortunately for us, we're able to have SAS here, and in the CJ Leeds case and our GDAC case, we're basically using them as a hosting provider for those services. If you're familiar with the hosting, you'll see that as you go on the data center tour. You'll see that all the data that we use is sitting in these SAS data centers, which have been working towards PCI compliance, 1075, all the things that get in the way of moving data. As your chief information officer will probably tell you, that's one of the things that keeps them up the most at night, is figuring out where the data is, who has it, and are they keeping it safe and secure. And you only have to look at Utah, South Carolina, and Alabama and see the hundreds of millions of dollars that cyber breaches have impacted their states. So it's important to make sure that you do business with partners that understand that and work and invest in the technology and the processes to protect the data. SAS obviously does that. That's why we do business with them.
And I'll say too, from a philosophical standpoint, federalism. And I know my two colleagues in the Senate feel like the state is the right place to be the repository of personal data, not the federal government, but the state. And so I know that our CIO shares the same concern, is we need to protect that data. I mean, that's the one thing that we can do for our citizens that needs to be done, that we data breaches are expensive, one, just on the bottom line, but then what it also costs you in terms of trust of state government, right? And there's lots of tidbits of data out there, we know that, but then also making sure that with that data that we're responsible and we make it work for our citizens. So as we're talking now, and we had a dinner a couple of weeks ago with our CIO from DMV. Everybody loves to go to DMV and wait in line and to get your license renewed, right? So we just passed out yesterday extending our electronic renewal online, and that's just really a small portion of what we're doing. It's modeled after several of the states, if anybody's from Virginia or Tennessee or some of the others that are already doing that. But then more importantly, as we become that correct repository of data, how do we apply GDAC to other business cases such as DMV? Because we do have so much data, and CJ leads, and we mingle the two, and that it's a right and good thing for us to do for our citizens. And we can get into a lot of debates about open data and things of that nature, but it is incumbent upon us to protect that data. So you got to have a good partner who's helping you get there, and we certainly put a lot of trust in SAS because they've demonstrated that they've earned it. So that's very important for us. With the case that we were talking about with DMV, I don't know, senators, what we're seeing is, again, the appropriations chairs for DOTs in both houses want to make sure we build roads. And so IT and data becomes an afterthought. And that was kind of the topic of our conversation at dinner the other day. So we're kind of transforming how we're going to fund, hopefully, in the future. Senators?
I think it is, and one thing I want to get to is, kind of as legislators, we always ask a lot of questions. And part of that process is, and whether it's IT or roads or whether it's coming across, we have a pre-K program. We want to see how effective our pre-K program is. Well, to do that, you're going to have to look at pre-K in the Department of Health and Human Services. You're going to have to look at K-12 educational data. You're going to have to look at workforce data. None of those talk to each other, at least previously in the state of North Carolina, at all. That was coming across. So we had staff would call one department, try to get a few informations on it, call another department, we'd get a sample size down to about 200, and that's what we were making policy decisions on. That's what we wanted to get away from in this whole operation. We wanted a DOT system that wasn't driven by a bunch of legislators sitting in a room saying, okay, who wants this project? Who wants this project? And so, how well I knew the pro temp last week determines whether or not that 4 lane's going to be in there. How about we start pulling some of that data together? How about we start looking at GIS data and moving that across? All these things are questions that ultimately we want to be able to answer sitting in the legislature without contacting those departments. We'll call up one center eventually when we get there. Not every agency wanted to come along. That's the other thing I will say. It was some teeth pulling to get some agencies because everybody's different and everybody's special when they're coming along. And so, and actually, apparently it didn't matter how many times we even put it in state law that they had some reason why they would. But fortunately now revenue needs a new payment processing system. So they've been kind of the hardest one to pull along, but all of a sudden they need a new payment processing system and it needs business intelligence capability. And they came to the legislature to ask for this. And so we have people that do that already in the state. So it's time for the little provision, and you'll see it this year. We'll see it in this year's budget coming across. So now why don't we do all business intelligence through one center and not have every agency going out and trying to find their own contract with their own company for something most of them don't even know what is, that they're going to put on. And we build the expertise when we do it once with one agency. We build an expertise in the state to do it with other agencies as we move forward. So that's kind of how we've put it together and grown. So I never thought revenue was the one that was important. They're federally protected data. But suddenly when they need something, they come. When they need money. Usually that's how they show up to the legislature. So it's one of those kind of things we've worked out, and that's how we've kind of put it together. But if you're going to break those down, I guess I would also say the mistakes I made in kind of being a newer legislature, I thought we'd have it all happen at once. This is the perfect idea when it's all together. Well, and I think they've got a slide up of the different agencies. That's not everybody yet. But we went with the ones we could get, what successes you could put together, bring them in, and as every one of them comes along, it's more important. And you grow your overall data. If I'm going to guess in the Department of Health and Human Services, or start with unemployment, if 22 unemployment checks happen to be mailed to the same address in fraud detection, that's a problem. What we were missing, and you could do that within the same silo, what we're missing is when that same address shows up in Medicaid billing. Even if it only shows up once, you should be looking at that. And as long as you keep them separate, no one's ever making those cross connections. And so we're all getting frauded as every state as well as the federal government. The other one we made is we had this great idea, and it still is, that it would fund itself coming off the saved funds. That's a great idea, with the exception of that limited us as a state to only looking at problems that were state funded or general fund revenue. Unemployment doesn't happen to be general fund revenue. So it's a mix. If you want the full package, then you're going to have to put some state revenue in it. You can build one across that will fund itself, but you're going to limit yourself by doing it. That's coming across. So it's going to be for each one of those what's a matter of importance to you. But you can sit down and plan those projects and coming on, but it's a correction we had to make. We have to go back and find the revenue for a year because we spent a year on federal money. But it's still a tax all our businesses were having to pay. Because as long as we got that debt out there, that federal goes up 0.3% on every employee every year until we get that full debt paid off. So that's important to us, but it wasn't on the general fund revenue side. And as most of you, we have a $20 billion general fund budget, but the state spends about $55 billion in every other funds of revenue and transportation and federal funds that come in, those kind of things. So you can fund it by itself, but then that limits you to that $20 billion pool for us. If you want to look at the other, then you probably need to make sure your bases are covered, at least until you build up a big enough revenue to make sure you can do both.
And so that the graphic's not lost on you behind us here, some of the what we did consider silos from before, you see how these are now pouring into GDAC so that we can utilize the data that we are collecting. So again, started from a tragedy, but has really become a really good thing for us as we start to even pour more data into it. So we've got to make sure the data is good data, as Senator Heiss alluded to, that and back to the unicorns and pixie dust scenario, sometimes we just have to guess, but we're doing a lot of things and putting those in place with some of the folks that Chris has been able to recruit and hire by working through the governor in the executive branch to make sure that we've got the right people in place that understand these things. Anything you want to add to that? And I'm sure we'll take questions. What time, Kevin, do we need to wrap up?
We got about 15 minutes.
Okay, so we got about 15. We got a question right here.
Yeah, just an observation. You guys sit on the budget committee, obviously. Anybody that's ever been on a budget committee knows that state agency head can find anecdotal evidence for anything, any program. They can try out and testify on why this program's working. And if you don't have something, we don't, by and large, we're working on it, but it's nothing objective, nothing performance-based to analyze that now. Obviously, you don't, because of the pixie dust comments, you don't have that completely in place, but I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about how that actually works now in the budgeting process. You're able to actually kind of sift through what's working, what's not. Presumably, you move your dollars around based on that, and that's what we'd like to do.
Well, I think on the, with the pixie dust, you're mainly talking about a House budget, not a Senate budget. We have, yeah. If we were saying we wouldn't run for office. And I think a part of that is, it's just having the, kind of having the moxie to look up the agency heads. And I know with, you know, I started working in the General Assembly when I was 20. I was an intern, you know, half my life ago. And I would see some of the arguments, and, you know, the same arguments be used time and time again. And then for us is to go back and say, well, yeah, you said that last year, you said that 10 years ago, but it's not true. What's the information? What's the data? And going back and really look into it. And, you know, one thing we've had in the state, and like I said, it goes against both parties, and it's that way in any state, of who was making, you know, how the decisions were being made. It wasn't made in a back room, and what are the repercussions and the consequences of those 10 years, 15 years down the road. I mean, you know, the problems we have in HHS, I was in the meeting when they happened 20 years ago, because the person who was putting it together was dating the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. But, I mean, and those are problems that, you know, that's cost us billions of dollars since this time. But, you know, by seeing that information and using the data, and I know, and here was the great thing about the, when we had the change in leadership, the speaker was a consultant for IBM. And, you know, he was known as the tech guy. But, the leader of the Senate, Senator Berger, you know, he was just as much of a tech guy, IT guy, very analytical. You know, those two guys coming together, probably more so, they understood the importance of it and saw the CJ Leeds play out and see how it worked. But then again, it was created under the Democrats at the time, and Senator Bass Knight and Speaker Hackney, and before that, it was created. And so it wasn't about, you know, Republican or Democrats, it's that it was a good program that worked. How was it implemented? Where did we put it? We put it in the state controller's office, because at the time, one of the most competent people in state government was the state controller, and he's fantastic. And but he was, you know, was that his real job to handle criminal justice in the controller's office? No, it should have been in public safety. But at the time, we had to get the right people with the right personalities to, you know, wade through all the information. And as legislators, you know, it's a knee-jerk society. There will be something on the state newspaper that day, and there will be immediate reaction by, we need to do something. But, you know, a lot of it is just, you know, keeping a cool head and let it prevail through all the information and not get lost in the fog of war.
I think that's right. And the evolution has been, and to you, Ralph, the evolution has been is we've now, because of the two leaders of both houses, understood the importance of IT, is that we now have joint IT oversight committees that have been there somewhat in place before. Andrew kind of spearheaded that to start with, but we spend most of our interim engrossed in what's happening in IT and understanding and dealing with those agencies, so that it's nothing's here's a new surprise while you were gone. This is what happened. We stay on top of it, not to the point of micromanaging, but simply making sure that we're top of mind all the time. Senator Heiss?
Yeah. Well, and I think the other side of it is, I think you have to have a vision of where you want to go, this kind of all your data sets within the state communicating with each other and able to pull analysis off of Christ. Unless you got something I don't, or nobody else in the chamber does, you're not going to get that all through at one time. I don't even know what that would begin to cost if you tried to tackle all that at once. But
I can let you know.
that was coming in. But you've really got to start with, you've got to identify where you think it will be successful. We would never have been able to do GDAC without the success that came from CJ Leeds. We weren't able to expand GDAC again, except for the success that it's had on our unemployment and running those numbers. So we're going to get there because it's going to build step by step. And I will tell you, I think, first of all, I say in all legislative things, you've got to have champions. Somebody's got to see the vision and say, this is where we're going. The second point of it is, I think all legislators that I've talked to across the country are tired of we just need more, we need more, or that cut was so bad last year, we need you to restore it. but they're starving for something they can get excited about, for an investment that they can make that they think will have a good return to the state. And if you can find that small project, I think those are much easier to get funded as startup funds, because that's what you're asking for. And then it kind of builds upon itself and moves across. And when your university's picking up now a program very much related, our advanced analytics program here at NC State that's coming in. So now you're starting to pick up more of that synergy that's coming in. 100% job placement rate. So anybody will take one of those programs. And the more that you can start pulling together, this will be the direction of IT, because it's building the momentum itself, not because I could walk in the first day and say, here's our final plan, let's just lay this out in the plan and do it. Because somebody will believe the universities are different, or somebody will believe that revenue is different and they shouldn't be part of this. And they're special, and then your whole thing collapses around itself. So that's where I think it's got to start, and that's where I think it's got to move. And great partners help tremendously. So.
Got a question over here.
Your first slide, I think, was the most impressive.
Okay.
You had all these agencies, some of them separately elected agencies. You had agencies dealing with secure data, public safety data, health data. How did you, it's a massive human problem. How did you collect the permissions, the legal aspect of putting these data sets together, taking it away from the owners? Some of them being funded by federal dollars that prohibit you from using them some other way. What was the process of getting that together, and are there any example legislative text and other agreements that were
Besides, we write the budget for them. And that is kind of, it's the power of the purse strings on a lot of it. You bring them in, we try to stay at it. The budget negotiations never end. We're already working on 3 years down the road, and look at and get them, it's like Ralph said, try to get them to buy in and look at it, because I had, one agency, I will not share my data, and I told them, I said, well, okay, let's change subject, and I went off on kind of on a different tangent and wrapped it back into a circle. He was, man, that's what we need to do. I'm like, that's exactly what I was talking about the very first instance. So
Sold.
Yeah. It took a while, but part of that is trying just one-on-one conversation, but also show where we've worked in other areas where GDAC's worked, and try to bring that information together. And most of them, they're coming around to looking at how they see it in when they talk to their neighbors, they talk at church and their civic groups. They see other corporations, other companies do it, and they want to be successful too. Yep. Because
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, and the other thing, first of all, shall lines work pretty well for the most part that are coming in, and we did some of that's coming in. But it's making agencies understand as well, I don't need DMV to give up their entire data and move it to the SAS campus here and say this is suddenly, they gave up all their data. All that's really needed for this data to work and connect is a connection to the data. They don't have to give up the data and someone else be in charge of it. We need things like to be able to query it for matches. And that calculation can be performed on their own server and just tell us where matches have occurred. So that may be in the weeds somewhat, but it's not a matter of saying we got all these people to give up their silos and their data. The other thing is when you start talking the expense overall, this lets them keep their silo. That antiquated, Pascal programmed, COBOL. That's our new language. So that's
COBOL's brand new to us.
That was coming in. They can keep
modern.
it. We just need to be able to communicate with it. So it's not all about IT just replacing it. There's ways to get the information. They can't because they don't have the expertise that our central individuals can. So when we say that we're having access, it's just an access flow. And oftentimes it means for read-only and those kind of things. But that's the first resistance, especially from revenue. This is federal data. No one can touch this. No one can see this. Well, that's not really what I was asking, but that's okay. Keep complaining. But it's good. But that's kind of what's putting together. But it has been tremendous in getting them all together and getting the vision. And your CIO will be as much a part of that as anyone. They got to buy all their IT through him. So.
Yeah, welcome Raleigh, Chris, and so now we've laid that in his lap, and he's got experience working with it now.
Yeah, first off, we still have work to do in that area. It's not perfect. So, but I think there is about 4 or 5 pages of legislation that governs GDAC, and so that would be a good starting point. I'm sure that someone can make that available after the meeting to you. So I'm gonna look at Kevin. We can get that to the members here. But there's 4 or 5 pages of legislation that governs the permitted use. It deals with some of the federal laws associated with data sharing, what's allowed. It gives special authority to the GDAC to make sure that it can do some of the things that it needs to do to fall in line with 1075 and some of the other compliance issues. So I think if you take a look at that, that'd be a good starting point. Getting the silos to work together, the money is an interesting way to control that and be able to manage that money to get to the vision that you have. I think the leadership has a vision, but then operationally, the executive branch has to implement that. So making sure that the executive branch and the leadership in the executive branch understands the vision, lines up to it, and helps you guys line up. The efficiency is the real reason to do it. Fraud, abuse, waste, those are some of the low-hanging fruit opportunities. But then as you start to integrate it into the business processes, it gets closer. We're not quite where we want to be yet, but getting closer to this gentleman's question about how do you run the business better. So you look across America, every company's got a big data initiative. If you're not sure about big data, just Google it, and there'll be more of the pages than you want to read about. But it's all about pulling data together so you can make better business decisions, and such as policy decisions on what programs you want to fund.
As a state CIO, how many of your peers have a comparable relationship?
I'm a member of something called NASIO, and so I spend time with my peer group twice a year, and I would say it's mixed. I'm lucky to have that relationship, and it doesn't just happen. Any relationship with anyone takes a commitment by both parties, and in this case, all 3. We got the executive and the House and the Senate that are all working together on a common vision. And so I think having that common vision about doing the right thing for the citizens, saving the money, so that my goal is to save money in IT, not in IT, but in the mission of the state. That's what the governor's trying to do. And once we save that money, it gives the policymakers decisions to put it somewhere else, like teacher raises or state employee raises or puppy mills, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Things we get to investigate. We get to play Santa Claus at that point once we find or return it back to the taxpayer.
There's a novel idea.
That's right, novel idea. Any other questions? I know we're getting close to wrapping up, or any commentary. Right here. Yeah.
I noticed on your second slide, in small letter, the red on the side, it talks about authentication. So is the data analytics center, are they sort of playing a role in identity management for the state? In terms of who needs to authenticate, like a Department of Emergency Management worker and authenticate their credentials versus looking at, maybe a recipient for services over
We have a.
and then how does that interact with DMV? Because we sort of piggyback in Virginia off DMV in providing a lot of those authentication services.
We have multiple authentication capabilities in the state. Our most common one is something called NCID, which is an ID that allows most of the state employees to access various systems. And so that is our identity program. There's some next generation identity management that's actually funded in the second year of the biennium, which we're moving into right now, that starts to move into another level of identity management. And we're looking at, much like you're mentioning with the DMV, we have a DMV modernization effort. We're looking at virtual IDs that issued at the time of driver's license issued, which would be a form of citizen ID. Right now, one of our problems has been our state employees use our NCID, and then we've started to use that identity for citizens, so when they do their taxes and other things. Teachers, we have a different identity management for our K through 12 because they were at a different spot. So there's a lot of effort that we have around kind of collapsing and managing our identity, because that really is, you kind of need to know who they are before you let them go do stuff.
And you've got some drivers there, from federal requirements, whether it be, two-factor authentication for LEOs or whatever. So it actually puts us at a great place as an opportunity to to continue to drive some of the things as we interact with our data. So it's it really, again, perfect storm almost with at least in North Carolina, with the folks who are in place and who understand it at this point in time. So, as your states, as folks understand that, they need to understand that there's multiple drivers to move this forward, not just the cost savings, not just the breaking down the silos, but other issues as well in terms of homeland security and data protection and everything else. Any other commentary right here in the back?
Yeah, one quick comment on the regulatory environment, sort of how you get these guys to play nice. On the cultural side, I think these agencies are contributors, but they're also beneficiaries. And I think the one thing that really helps is if you not only go ask for their data, but you show them what they can get back out of it if they contribute and also have access to the other data. The other thing I'll say on the regulatory side of things is that people in this room control the regulations. Regulations can be changed. Obviously, you have limited effect on the federal level, but things are changing there as well. You talk about IRS data. IRS issued a policy change April of last year that said IRS tax data can be used to detect and prevent fraud in federal benefit programs. So these things are changing, evolving over time to adapt to the changing technology capabilities and the value that they're seeing of doing it. And North Carolina was a good example with the GDAC program. The legislature issued what I call the thou shalt share provision, which basically said it didn't change any law. Effectively, what it said is that thou shalt share unless there is a federal regulation or federal law or state regulation that prevents you from sharing. So it sort of put the responsibility on the agency. If they say, I can't share my data, they got to prove that they can't share their data. So there are things that people in this room can do to impact that regulatory environment by changing law, which results in changes to the actual regulations at the executive level. So.
No, that's exactly right. That's a perfect commentary to that. Cultural change that you brought up, Chris can probably speak to the cultural change that he's seen with as we've put new folks in that I know, what do you meet, twice a month or once a month with all your agency CIOs, so that they're also changing their culture in terms of sharing that's been successful.
We have 13 new CIOs, so or executives that run IT in the last 18 months, and that does change the collaboration. I interviewed and hired every one of them with the secretaries, so that makes a big difference. Having that support from the secretary and the governor that we're going to work together makes a huge difference in the operations of the executive branch.
Good refresh. So I guess we're at our time, but
now, a few of you all will be joining us for dinner, I hope.
Yeah.
So what questions we ask there? Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you.
If you have given me your NDA, then you can go on a bus. If you haven't given me your NDA, you don't need to go on the bus.
Western North Carolina here, I've